The distress signal came in at 0300 station time, buried between a mining report and a weather alert from the outer belt. Varric almost missed it that he was a senior analyst for the Galactic Union Observation Corps, and after 211 years of service, very little surprised him anymore. He sorted through distress signals the way other people sorted laundry. Routine, mechanical, done before the first cup of morning concentrate cooled. But this one made him pause. A human vessel. Down on Varith 4, he pulled up the planetary file first. Varith 4 was a Class 4 hostile world. Geothermal activity across 60% of the surface. Toxic gas vents. Predatory wildlife with known natural competitors. Gravity running at 1.2 times galactic standard. The kind of place that even well-equipped survey teams avoided when possible. Then he pulled up the file on humans. Nira, his data clerk, a young Salvari barely 40 years into her career, leaned over from her station. What is it? Human vessel. Scout class. Went down 8 hours ago. He read from the file aloud, not for her benefit, but because saying it helped him process. No natural armor. No biological venom. Bone structure classified as moderately fragile under pressure stress. Sensory range below galactic average. Average lifespan under 100 years. He scrolled to the bottom. Survival probability in Class 4 environments. Negligible. Nira looked at the word for a moment. Should we send a drone? We are required to. Varric was already filing the dispatch. Diplomatic obligation. Humans were admitted to the Union 8 years ago. We have to make the effort. He submitted the request and leaned back. Do not expect much to recover. The drone was dispatched. The file was marked active. Varric moved on to the mining report. He forgot about it for most of the morning. On Varith 4. Durohale opened his eyes to a sky the color of rust. He was lying on his back, half inside the broken hull of his scout ship, half buried under a sheet of fallen hull paneling. Ash was coming down like gray snow. The smell of burning metal was thick in the air. His ears were ringing. He lay still for exactly 10 seconds. Not because he was in shock, because he was listening, checking, running through his body the way a mechanic checks an engine. Head, neck, spine, arms. Left hand was burned badly, the skin tight and shining. Side had a deep cut, already clotted but pulling when he breathed. 2 ribs that complained when he moved. Everything else was functional. He sat up. 3 crewmates. He checked each one. Ola was gone, still strapped in her navigation seat, head at the wrong angle. Bryn and Sim were in the back compartment. Both gone, the compartment collapsed. He did not linger. There was nothing to do for them, now that he moved through the wreck with focus. The ship's main communicator was destroyed, the panel blackened and caved in. The emergency locator was gone with the tail section, which had separated on impact and landed somewhere out in the ash field. He dug through the supply locker and found what mattered. 7 days of rations, a water filtration unit, a basic medical kit, a survival blanket made of reflective material, 2 lengths of metal cable, thin but strong, a directional beacon tracker, the kind that could pick up the signal from a Union relay station but could not send. He checked the tracker. The nearest relay station was showing a signal from the northwest. Distance, 904 kilometers. He looked at the number for a while. Then he ate 1 ration bar, drank a measured amount of filtered water, wrapped his burned hand, packed everything that could fit into a carry bag he made from a torn seat harness, and walked out of the wreck. The ash was ankle-deep. The air tasted like iron. The gravity pressed on his shoulders like a hand pushing down. He checked the tracker, adjusted his direction, walked northwest. Back in the observation hall, mid-afternoon, Varric's console gave a quiet chime. He glanced over. Darrow's personal biosensor, a standard implant all Union-registered crew carried, had connected to the network. The signal was coming from Varith 4. He stared at it. A biosensor signal meant the wearer was alive. The readings were right there: elevated stress hormones, moderate dehydration, a wound on the left side, elevated heart rate from physical exertion. Physical exertion. Moving, the human was walking. Varric pulled up the map overlay and placed the biosensor location against the terrain data. The signal was 3 kilometers northwest of the crash site, already moving away from the wreck at a steady pace. He checked the timestamp on the crash, 8 hours ago. He checked the biosensor activation time. The human had been moving for at least 4 hours, but he looked at the readout for a long time without moving. Then he changed the file status from routine to monitored and added a note, subject alive. Ambulatory. Directions suggest deliberate navigation. Continuing observation. Nira passed behind him and glanced at the screen. Is that the human? Yes. It is walking. Yes. She looked at the map, at the terrain between that small moving dot and the relay station, at the scorched flats and the mountains and the river systems marked in red on the overlay. She did not say anything. She went back to her station. Varric kept the file open. He watched the dot move, but he did not go home at the end of his shift. He stayed. He watched. The dot kept moving through the dark. The biosensor feed was still active when Nira arrived for her shift on day 4. She had checked it before sleeping. She had checked it when she woke up. She was not sure when that had started feeling normal. She set her concentrate down beside her console and looked at the map overlay without being asked. The dot was moving, still northwest, still steady. Varric was already at his station. He had the terrain data pulled up beside the biosensor feed, cross-referencing the human's pace against the geography ahead. He looked tired in the way Salvari rarely looked tired, something behind his eyes that had not been there 4 days ago. He is entering the scorched flats today, Varric said without turning. Geothermal field. Average surface temperature during daylight hours is 61 degrees. Ground vents release sulfur and trace toxins on a variable cycle. He paused. Most large fauna avoid it entirely. Nira looked at the dot. What does the human do? Let's watch. Darrow had known the hot ground was coming since yesterday. The tracker did not show terrain, just direction and distance, but the air had been changing for hours. Getting drier. Carrying a faint chemical smell underneath the usual iron taste of Varitha's atmosphere. He had slowed his pace and started watching the ground. He reached the edge of the scorched flats in the late morning and stopped. The ground ahead was pale and cracked, like old clay that had been baked too long. Low-heat shimmer rose from the surface. Every few minutes, somewhere across the flat, a thin column of gas pushed up from a crack and dissolved into the air. The gas was colorless, but it moved in a way that made the air above it ripple strangely. He did not try to cross. Not in the heat of the day. He found a depression in the rock behind him, a shallow scoop in the hillside, just deep enough to block the wind. He unfolded the reflective survival blanket and rigged it between 2 outcroppings of rock using cable, creating a low, narrow shelter that bounced the sun's heat away. He crawled inside, ate half a ration bar, drank carefully from the filtered water, and slept. Back in the observation hall, Varric noted the biosensor slowing, then going to resting state. He pulled up Darrow's carry-weight log from the initial salvage scan at the wreck site. The human had taken extra cable from the ship. Dead weight that slowed him down. Nira had asked about it on day 1, and he had not had a good answer. That he had one now. The cable was a tool. Darrow was not just walking. He was building as he went. A nightfall, when Varith IV's temperature dropped to something survivable. The biosensor showed Darrow moving again. Varric tracked him across the scorched flats for the next 6 hours. The human moved in a slow diagonal, avoiding the active vent zones by reading the cracks in the ground, stopping when the gas columns appeared too close, rerouting, continuing. No technology, no map, just observation and judgment. He was across before the sun came up. Then the ridgehounds found him. The drone's long-range sensor was the first to catch them, a pack of 6 circling from the east. Ridgehounds hunted in coordinated patterns, cutting off retreat before rushing. Varith 4 wildlife had no concept of hesitation. When they committed fully. Varric felt something in his chest that he did not immediately identify. Dot on the ground. Darrow heard them before he saw them. A sound between a click and a hiss, low and rhythmic, coming from more than one direction. He stopped walking and turned slowly, scanning point 6 shapes. Low to the ground, moving wide around him. He looked at the terrain instead of at the animals. There was a vent field 30 meters to his left, one of the larger ones, a cluster of cracks that had been releasing gas steadily all night. The hounds were giving it a wide berth. Every pass they made in their circling pulled them away from it slightly. They were afraid of it. Darrow turned and walked directly toward the vent field. Not running. Walking. Measured steps, watching the cracks, finding the path through. The sulfur gas hit him hard. His eyes watered. He coughed, pulled his collar up over his nose, and kept moving until he was standing in the middle of the active zone, surrounded by venting cracks on all sides. The Ridgehound stopped. The nearest one came 6 steps closer, clicked twice, then turned away. The others followed. In less than a minute, they were gone. Darrow stood in the gas cloud for another 2 minutes to make sure, then walked out the far side, eyes still streaming, and continued northwest in the observation hall. Nira let out a slow breath. Varric realized he had been holding his own. He typed in his daily report. Subject displays environmental reading ability beyond expected parameters for a species without enhanced sensory biology. Adaptation appears intuitive and rapid. Uses available hazards as tools. He stopped, considered, then added one more line. Recommend continued priority monitoring. The Council of 12 had not yet been informed. Varric was not certain why he had not flagged it upward yet. He told himself it was because there was nothing conclusive to report. He did not fully believe that. He pulled up the terrain map for the next 50 kilometers. The river was coming. He looked at the water data, the current speed, the crossing options. Then he looked at the dot, still moving northwest in the dark, that he stayed at his station again. The briefing request came from above Varric's level. Someone in the upper reporting chain had noticed the extended monitoring flag on the human file. By day 7, Varric had submitted 4 daily reports that were longer than standard and had kept a priority drone in stationary orbit above Varith 4 rather than reassigning it. That kind of resource use drew attention. Eventually, he was called to present his findings to the Council of 12. He prepared his data. He did not prepare an apology for the resource use. When he walked into the council chamber, a circular room with high walls and the flags of 12 species lining the upper tier, he connected his display feed without ceremony and began. The human has been on the surface for 7 days, he said. He has covered 312 kilometers on foot with no functioning communication technology in a Class 4 environment. He has crossed the Scorched Flats geothermal zone and survived 2 predator encounters. He pulled up the biosensor data. He is currently injured. Cracked ribs, a side wound that has reopened once, moderate dehydration. He is continuing to move. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then the Drukai representative spoke. The Drukai were insectoid, heavily armored, each one the size of a small vehicle. Their representative had a voice like stones grinding together. Sensor error, it said, or the data is being misread. A soft body species does not function in those conditions. The biosensor data is direct biological feed, Varric said. It is not interpreted. Those are his actual vital signs. Then it is luck, the Drukai said. Randomness. It cannot hold. Varric looked at his data screen. Then he made a decision. He patched the live biosensor feed into the chamber display. Then we watch, he said. The Mirath River appeared on the map at midday. Darrow stood on the bank for a long time. Varric had pulled the river data the night before. Current speed was high from seasonal runoff. Average depth at the crossing point was 2 meters. The bottom was unstable gravel. Even with full gear and rested muscles, crossing directly would be dangerous. Darrow walked the bank for half a day. In the council chamber, one of the representatives made a comment about aimless behavior. Nira, standing at the back of the room behind Varric, said nothing but looked at the floor. Then Darrow stopped walking. He had found a natural rock shelf, wide and shallow, running at a diagonal across the river. It was partially submerged, but visible just under the surface, pale stone under moving water. The diagonal crossing was longer than going straight across, but the depth looked manageable and the rock was solid footing. He spent an hour rigging a guide rope. One end was anchored to a heavy rock using a wrapped loop he tightened by hand. The rope ran out into the water at the angle of the shelf. He tested the anchor 3 times before stepping in. He was halfway across when the shelf dropped. A section of submerged rock, weakened by the current, broke away under his right foot. He went down, the rope yanked out of his grip, and the current took him. 200 meters downstream before he caught an outcrop of rock with both hands and held. The council chamber was completely still. Darrow hung there for a moment, chest against the rock, water pushing hard at his legs. Then he pulled himself up onto a narrow ledge, coughing river water. He sat. The biosensor showed his heart rate at extreme elevation. Stress hormones spiked high on the readout. Nobody in the chamber spoke. The biosensor showed the elevated state holding for 4 minutes. They began to drop, slowly at first, then steadily. Heart rate coming down, breathing regularizing, the stress spike flattening. Then the location began moving again. Northwest. He had lost ground in the drift, but his direction was already correcting. The Drukai representative had not spoken since the crossing attempt. Varric watched it, watching the feed. Its mandibles moved slightly, but no words came out. Varric pulled up the next section of terrain on the display without comment. Mountains ahead. Thin air. Temperature drops at altitude. Luz roc terrain. He still has 600 kilometers to go, said one of the other council members, a Fari, small and gray with large observational eyes. Its voice was careful, neither dismissive nor convinced. Yes, Varric said, and you believe he will reach the relay station. Varric considered the question honestly. I believe he will not stop trying to. That was different from what he would have said 7 days ago. He recognized a shift in himself and did not apologize for it. The council voted to extend the drone assignment without debate. No one raised the resource question. The Drukai representative left without making further comments about luck or sensor error. Nira helped Varric pack up the display equipment after the chamber cleared. She was quiet until they were in the corridor. The Drukai representative, she said. It did not look away. During the crossing, the whole time he was in the water, it did not look away once. Varric thought about that. No, he said. It did not. He went back to his station. He opened the human file and looked at the line about fragile bone structure. He did not delete it. He wrote beside it in the notes column, structural flexibility, recovery rate high. He looked at it for a moment. Then he opened the terrain file for the Hollowback Mountains and started reading. By day 11, Varric had stopped pretending he was doing anything else while the feed was active. There were other files on his desk, other signals, other assignments, a survey dispute between 2 member species over a mineral-rich moon that had been sitting in his queue for 9 days. He had not opened it. He told himself he would get to it. He did not get to it. Nira had stopped asking if he needed anything at the end of her shift. She just stayed too. The Hollowback Mountains had been on the terrain map for days, a dark ridged mass sitting between Darrow and the relay station plateau, the last major obstacle before the final approach. Varric had read the geological data carefully. Loose scree on the lower slopes. Altitude gaining fast. Oxygen thinning at the higher passes. Night temperatures dropping to ranges that would cause cellular damage in most warm-blooded species without biological insulation. Darrow had none of that insulation. He had a survival blanket and whatever heat his body could hold. The biosensor showed him entering the lower slopes on the morning of day 11. His pace had slowed by then. Not stopped. Not irregular, just slower. He was burning more calories than the rations could fully replace. The numbers showed it quietly. Metabolic rate elevated, body mass indicator trending slightly down, the wound on his side flagging a minor infection that his immune response was fighting without medication, that he was worn down. The data showed it clearly, he was still moving. The data showed that too. The rock slide happened in the afternoon. Varric saw the biosensor spike before the drone's terrain sensor even registered the event. Heart rate jumping, movement stopping. Then the location was stationary, and the stress readings were as high as they had been in the river. The drone's camera shifted to get a visual. A section of the upper slope had given way, a cascade of loose rock rolling down a gully and hitting the narrow trail Darrow had been climbing. The visual showed rocks scattered across the path, a fresh scar in the slope above, and beneath one of the larger deposits of shifted stone, a human partially buried from the waist down. The chamber feed was open. The council had taken to keeping the live display running. Varric heard Nira make a small sound behind him. Darrow's hands appeared on the sensor feed, moving, pushing at the rocks, shifting them individually, finding leverage, moving each one aside and reaching for the next. The biosensor showed the effort in the physical data, elevated muscle strain, sharp pain, responses flagging in the readout. One rock required 3 separate attempts before it moved it. A tee took 3 hours to tee the end of it. Darrow pulled his legs free, checked them with his hands, stood up, put weight on each foot in turn, and continued climbing that eye in the chamber. One of the council members said something that Varric did not catch. He did not ask for it to be repeated. That night, Darrow sheltered in a shallow cave on the eastern face of the mountain. The temperature outside dropped hard after dark. The biosensor showed him managing it with the survival blanket, his core temperature holding in a survivable range, but only just. His rest cycle was broken. He woke twice, and the data showed him moving slightly, shifting position, keeping circulation going. Then, near the middle of the night, something came through the biosensor audio feed. Varric noticed it first because the file flagged an unexpected vocalization. He pulled up the audio. It was brief. A low sound, exhausted, rough around the edges. It took a moment to classify it. Laughter, not desperate, not hysterical, just a quiet, worn-out sound, like something private that had slipped out without meaning to. It lasted a few seconds. Then it stopped. Then the biosensor showed Darrow going back to sleep. Vera played it again. Nira had come over without being called. She listened to the recording. She said nothing for a while. Then she said, "Why does he do that?" "I do not know." Varric said. They listened to it a third time. It still did not make complete sense. But there was something in it that both of them recognized without being able to name. Something that felt less like a malfunction and more like a particular kind of toughness, the kind that does not come from being hard, but from having decided that the hard things are not going to win. Day 13. The Stonecrawler encounter. The creature was a solitary predator, one of the largest things on Varith 4, 6 meters of low body and dense muscle that hunted entirely by ground vibration. It had no eyes. It did not need them. It could detect a footstep from 400 meters that IT was sitting on the ridge that Darrow needed to cross. There was no other route. The terrain on both sides dropped into impassable drops. Varric checked the map 3 times, looking for another option. There was not one. Darrow stopped at the base of the ridge and observed the creature for 53 minutes. The drone's camera tracked him tracking it. He watched the creature's rest cycle, the slow movement of its body, the pattern of its stillness. He looked at the wind direction, checking the ash drift. He looked at the rock underfoot. Then high wind came rolling across the mountain face, strong and constant, pressing sound flat against the stone. Darrow began walking. Slow and even, each step placed with full attention, weight transferred smoothly. No scrape, no sudden shift. He moved in a line that kept him to the windward side of the creature. Letting the air carry his sound away, he walked the full length of the ridge. He passed within 40 meters of it. The creature did not move. Varric sat back in his chair. He realized his hands had been flat against the desk for the last 10 minutes. He looked at them. Then he looked at the dot, now past the ridge, continuing down the far slope toward the plateau. He filed his report for the day. The last line read, "The subject does not require luck. He manufactures it." He sent the report to the full council before he could reconsider. Day 15 began with the plateau in sight. Varric had the terrain map open before Nero arrived. He had measured the remaining distance 3 times during the night shift handover. Not because the number changed, but because looking at it made him feel like he was doing something useful. The relay station sat at the far end of the plateau, 6 hours of walking on flat ground from where Darrow was now, descending the last mountain slope. 6 hours. Flat ground. The hardest part should have been behind him. Varric ran the biosensor data against the pace calculations and got a number he did not like. Darrow's walking speed had dropped to 60% of his day 1 rate. That was expected. Cracked ribs, a healing side wound with minor infection, severe dehydration because the water filtration unit had started showing strain after 2 weeks of constant use. The ration supply was down to less than 1 full day. His body was running a deficit that rest and food could fix, but it had not had enough of either, and the mountain had taken what reserves were left at a T 60% pace. The 6-hour crossing became 10 hours. The biosensor data suggested his body had roughly 8 hours of functional movement left before it would begin shutting down non-essential systems to protect core function. The math did not clear. Varric did not share this calculation with the council chamber. He opened a side window on his display and kept it there, just for himself, watching the numbers. Darrow reached the plateau edge by mid-morning. He stood at the top of the last descent, and through the drone's camera, Varric could see what Darrow was seeing. Open flat ground, pale and wide. The relay station, a small structure at the far end with the beacon tower rising above it. He could see it. He was looking directly at it. He stood there for 2 minutes. Then he began moving, and Varric watched him do something methodical. He stopped, opened his carry bag, and removed items one by one. The second length of cable set aside. The remaining salvage material he had been carrying since day one. The reflective blanket, which he kept. Everything else that could not directly sustain him set down on the rock. Lighter. He was going lighter. That he adjusted the way he was walking too. Instead of his previous long, steady pace, he shifted to shorter steps, more frequently taken, with brief stops every 40 minutes. Less efficient in theory. In practice, for a body at the edge of reserve, it was better management. It kept blood moving. It prevented the deep muscle lock that came from pushing too hard on a system with nothing left to push with. He knew his body was failing. He was managing the failure. Varric looked at the numbers. The new pace was slower in raw speed, but more sustainable. He ran the calculation again. Still close. Still very close. The plateau was 2 hours in when the terrain sensor flagged something new. Varric pulled up the alert. A thermal vent field had opened across the central plateau, roughly a kilometer wide, sitting directly between Darrow and the station. The geological survey data for Varith 4 was 8 months old. In 8 months, the ground had shifted. The vent field did not exist on any map Darrow had access to. It existed now. Gas columns rising in a loose cluster across his direct path. Ground unstable, surface temperature elevated in the active zones. The dot on the map stopped. IT stopped for 22 minutes. Nira had come to stand beside Varric's station without either of them noticing when she moved. The council feed was open. The chamber was silent. Varric was aware of the Drukai representative somewhere behind him, but he did not turn a look. He watched the 22 minutes of stillness. The biosensor showed a resting heart rate, which meant Darrow was not in distress. He was thinking. He was sitting on the edge of an unmapped obstacle with a body running on the last of its reserves, and he was thinking. Then the dot moved, not straight. It curved left, away from the vent field, tracing around its edge. The route around was longer. Varric did not need the calculation to tell him what it cost. He ran anyway. 2 extra hours added to a body that had 8 hours of function left and had already used 6 of them. The dot kept moving. IT slowed on the far side of the vent field. The biosensor showed the pace dropping further. Not stopping, dropping. The steps were coming slower and the gaps between movement spikes in the activity data were getting longer. 1 hour from the station. The biosensor flagged a warning. Blood pressure dropping. Core temperature sliding at the edges. The body pulling resources inward. Varric did not move from his screen. He was not aware of breathing. 30 minutes. The dot was crawling now, barely registering as movement against the plateau background, but it was moving, and it was going northwest, and the direction did not waver. The relay station's automated sensor picked up the biosensor signal at the 15-minute mark and logged the approach. Varric saw the station log entry appear in the corner of his feed and felt something release in his chest that he had not known was locked. The drone's camera caught the moment Darrow reached the station door. He did not rush through it. He pushed it open and walked in, one step at a time, and went straight to the beacon console. His hands were visible on the feed, burned and shaking, the left one wrapped in torn cloth that had been rewrapped multiple times over 15 days. He found the activation sequence. He entered it. The beacon went live. Then the biosensor flatlined. 3 seconds. Varric counted them. 3 seconds of no signal. Then it returned, low and shallow, heart rate minimal, but steady. He had passed out against the console. The beacon was transmitting. He was breathing in the observation hall. No one spoke. Nira had her hand pressed against her mouth. Varric looked at the steady green pulse of the beacon signal on his screen and at the faint, slow rhythm of the biosensor beside it, and he sat very still for a long time. Then he began typing. His hands were not fully steady. He noticed that. He typed anyway. The recovery drone reached Varith 4 18 hours after the beacon activated. Varric watched the descent on the drone camera feed. Not because he needed to monitor the retrieval, the medical unit was automated and fully capable, but because he had watched every hour of the 15 days before it, and stopping now felt wrong somehow. The drone landed outside the relay station in the gray morning light of Aerith 4. The door opened. The camera moved through the interior. And there was Darrow Hale, not lying flat on the floor, as Varric had half expected, but sitting against the wall beside the beacon console, legs stretched out in front of him. Alive, he looked like something that had been taken apart and put back together in the field. His clothes were patched with torn material. His left hand was wrapped in what had once been a sleeve. There was ash in his hair that had been there so long it had settled in. His face was thinner than the crew photo in his file, the one taken 8 months ago in a Union docking bay, where he had been smiling at whoever was behind the camera. He was not smiling now. But his eyes were open and tracking the drone as it approached, and when the medical unit extended toward him, he cooperated with it, holding his arm out without being told, letting it scan and inject and assess. He said something to the drone. The audio caught it. Vera played it back. Took you long enough. Nira, hearing it from across the room, made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. The drone's medical unit completed its initial assessment and filed the report to Varric's console. Cracked ribs, 2 of them. Side wound with resolved minor infection. Second-degree burns on the left hand, covering 40% of the palm. Severe dehydration. Acute caloric deficit. Mild hypothermia effects in the extremities. Stress fracture in the right foot, likely from the rock slide on day 11, that Darrow had apparently not noticed or had chosen to continue on regardless. The medical unit classified his condition as serious but stable. Varric read the stress fracture entry twice. A stress fracture. Darrow had walked on a fractured foot for 4 days without the biosensor flagging it as a major event because he had not stopped moving. The pain data had been there in the feed, a consistent low-level flag that Varric had logged as terrain-related exertion. He added a note to the file. As the drone lifted off from Varith IV's surface, Darrow sat in the small passenger cabin and looked out the single viewport. Varric had the cabin camera feed open, but was not watching the human anymore. He was looking at his report that IT was long. He had been writing pieces of it for days, adding to it each night after his shifts ended, and now he read through the whole thing with the distance of someone reading work they had done a long time ago. It felt like something written by a version of himself that no longer quite existed. He was presenting it to the Council of 12 in 1 hour. He walked into the chamber with the report loaded and began without sitting down. I am presenting a formal correction to the Union's biological assessment of humanity, he said, not as an editorial, as a data correction. The current assessment contains errors of classification that affect policy decisions, resource allocation, and species interaction protocol. He walked through it section by section. The fragile bone structure entry, structurally flexible under repeated impact stress. High recovery rate, stress fractures sustained and functioned through without behavioral shutdown. The limited sensory range entry, compensated through environmental observation and pattern recognition. Subject operated without technological augmentation across terrain types that defeated technological navigation. The short lifespan entry, high-intensity function within that lifespan. The briefness appears to drive behavior rather than limit it. The survival probability in class for environments entry, the one that had read negligible, Varric addressed last. This classification is not just inaccurate. It is the wrong kind of wrong. It assumes that survival is primarily biological. That armor stops damage. That venom deters threats. That sensory range predicts outcomes. He paused. The human did not survive because his body was sufficient. His body was not sufficient by our measures. He survived because he would not stop. That is a different category of survival, and we do not have a classification for it. He proposed one. He called it soft persistent, a species that endures not through biological hardness, but through a behavioral drive that continues to function past the point where biology alone would produce shutdown. The chamber was quiet when he finished. The Drukai representative spoke first, and Varric remembered what Nira had said about it, not looking away during the river crossing. How many of them are there? It asked. Umans. How many exist currently? Varric told it. The number sat in the chamber for a moment. Nobody said anything for a while after that. Not dismissively, not in fear, just in the particular silence that comes when a group of people realizes they have been thinking about something wrong for a long time. The report was accepted without formal opposition. The reclassification was entered into the Union Biological Registry the following day. It would take time to work through the policy implications. These things always did. Varric went back to his station after the session ended. He opened Darrow's file one last time. He found the original assessment at the top, the one he had read aloud to Nira on the first morning, the one that had listed every biological inadequacy and ended with that single word. Negligible. He looked at it for a moment. Then he selected it. He deleted it. The field was empty now, the survival probability row showing nothing, waiting for something more accurate to take its place. He put his hands on the desk and thought about what to write. He thought about the scorched flats and the river and the laughter in the cave at night and the fractured foot and the 22 minutes of stillness at the edge of an unmapped obstacle before the dot began moving again. He typed a new entry. He saved the file. He did not share what he had written. That was between him and the record. He closed the console, picked up his notes from the session, and walked out of the observation hall into the corridor, where the light was steady and the air tasted like nothing at all. Behind him, on a screen that had gone to standby, the file sat closed. Inside it, in the survival probability field, where negligible had been, 2 words waited in the record point, 2 words that the galaxy would take a while to understand, but would not forget.